We have heard a lot about different genocides. There is an Iranian genocide where British soldiers in World War I that were fighting in Asia didn't want to starve, and they bought all the goods that was coming into Iran. And by doing this, they create a famine inside Iran, and millions of Iranians die because of that. This subject deserves its own video. But our video is not about the Iranian famine. It's about a man-made famine, and it was purposefully done. And we're talking about Holodomor. Holodomor is a Ukrainian word, and it means starving to death. Holodomor is basically a genocide, and it was performed by this guy, Joseph Stalin. Stalin believed that one of the most important areas in the USSR is Ukraine, and if anything were to happen to this area, USSR would not have the original power it once had. And that is why Stalin was very strict towards Ukraine. Stalin was very evil and strict in all ways, but when you're talking about Ukraine, you should turn it up. In the year 1917, when the Bolsheviks took over Russia, Ukraine gained independence and got themselves out of the USSR. But about 5 years later, when the communists had true power in Russia, they came and took Ukraine back, and they added this land to the Russian land. Right now, to this day, most of Ukraine is farmland, and back then it was the exact same. Most of this country were farmers and farmland. Not only was the soil valuable to the communists, but the goods were also useful. This part of Europe, meaning Ukraine, has one of the best soils in the whole continent. And even though it's in a very cold area, it's very easy to farm. And Stalin knew this, and that is why he was extremely strict for this piece of land. Do you know what Stalin and his people called this piece of land? They called it the breadbasket of the Soviet Union because it had an insane amount of wheat. In the 1920s, where the communists had the whole land to themselves, and that includes Ukraine, the communists would have meetings, and they would say Ukraine is the most dangerous place of Russia. And by dangerous, I mean they were against the communist regime. After this, the Communist Party went into Ukraine and killed all the powerful people, and that includes the religious people. And as you know, the communists were atheists. Time passes and we get to the year 1927, and this is when Stalin has maximum power in Russia, and the entire land is in his hands. The law for the communist regime was that anybody that has a business or farm, they have to give it to Moscow. And if they plan on to selling it to someone else or other countries, Moscow has to do it. And that means the government wants the true profit. Farmers weren't allowed to sell their goods, not even to people. There would be police force sent to people's houses, and the excuse was they take the goods, send it to Moscow, they sell it, and spread the profit all around the country so everybody is equal. With this method, not only do you guys not starve, but the government can get what it needs to get done. After this law, the Ukrainians started to complain about the communist regime. By this, I don't mean they went into the streets and started protesting, because they would not survive if they did that. But they would tell the people around them that this law is not good. Since Stalin was very strict about Ukraine, he gets a word that this is happening. And that is why he tells his people to spread propaganda that makes the Ukrainian people look bad. This was the propaganda posted at that time, and it basically says that the Ukrainian people are greedy and they are not the friend of the Soviet people. In a lot of the propaganda, they would show the Ukrainian people as parasites. After this, Stalin told his people to arrest the big dog farmers in Ukraine. They arrest a lot of these people and basically make them immigrate somewhere else in the USSR. But the tensions would not stop in Ukraine, and that was making Stalin mad. And that is when he ordered a famine to happen. In the year 1932, Stalin told his people to go to Ukraine, go into people's houses, and find whatever goods, from weeds to anything edible, and take it to Moscow. After doing this, 4.5 million tons of wheat was found in Ukraine, and that was because most Ukrainians were farmers, and they had some for the winter months. All these wheats and goods were stolen and sent to Moscow. Until the 1932, the Soviet government would storm people's houses and take whatever edible thing they had, to the point where there was nothing edible left. And winter is coming. 1 month later, in January of 1933, the Ukrainian people start walking away from their home to find some food. But before this happened, Stalin had told his men to protect the borders of Ukraine and don't allow even a fly to pass from this border. More than 10,000 Ukrainians tried to escape outside these walls to find some food, but the police would arrest them. And even though they wanted to take them to jail, but they wouldn't take them to jail. They would tell them to go back where you came from. Thousands of people are dying day by day, and wherever you walk, you see dead bodies. The Ukrainians were starving for so long that they would eat just about anything. They would eat their pets, cats, dogs, different types of birds, and they even ate rats and mice. And some were so hungry that they committed cannibalism. Some people had hidden wheat that the people of Stalin could not find, and they would try to give the people around them. But obviously, they were terrified of doing so, and that's why thousands of people are dying a day, but they can't do anything about it. In the middle of 1933, there was a message to Stalin that how many people are actually dying in Ukraine, and that number was over 3 million people, and it seems like Stalin knew that, and that's why he opened up the borders after this. But it seems like the message was wrong, because when you look at it, more than 4 million Ukrainians died of starvation in that year. Stalin would use this method in all parts of the USSR. The North Caucasus would not listen to Moscow, and that's why they created a famine there, and hundreds of thousands of people died. It's good to know that the North Caucasus is the hometown of Stalin, because he's from Georgia. He had a man-made famine in Kazakhstan as well, where 1.5 million people died. So many Ukrainians died that when they began work once again, they didn't have enough people. And that's when Stalin says, no problem. And he sent Russians from other parts of the country to Ukraine. As you know, in the USSR, you couldn't just move city to city. Anywhere you wanted to move, you would have to get permission. And from the other way around, when they ordered you, for example, you have to move from Moscow to Ukraine, you couldn't say no. You have to pack up, take your wife and kids, and go to Ukraine. The same part where the Russians are in Ukraine is the reason that Putin attacked Ukraine. During that time in the USSR news, this is how they said the famine took place. There was a famine in Ukraine and this many people died. They wouldn't say that Stalin ordered this to happen, but the Westerners would not believe it. They wouldn't believe that this huge land with this much farmland has this many people dying of starvation. But obviously they couldn't investigate because there was an iron curtain around the area. All these photos you're seeing of the dead people, the people starving to death, and the people that are on the streets, hoping to find some food. Most of these photos came out after the USSR collapsed, and that's about 60 years after this took place. Back then, they were terrified to release pictures like this. Anywhere they went, they were communist agents, and they couldn't do anything about it. Years passed and years passed, and the communist regime always tried to sweep Holodomor under the rug, and they were trying to make people forget. But the Ukrainians did not forget, and they told generation after generation what took place. Holodomor is known as a genocide now, a genocide that happened because of Joseph Stalin. After the USSR collapsed, Ukraine told the Russian government that the Russian government should take responsibility to what happened to the Ukrainian people in 1932. But the Russian government said that we are suffering from the USSR government just as bad as you, and a lot of Russian people died because of this regime. But they are not wrong, because Stalin didn't even show mercy to Georgia, his own hometown. Forget about the whole entire country. It seems like this area cannot take it easy. And as you know, Ukraine is in a war right now, and it seems like it's never ending. More than 50% of the Ukrainian people were forced to move to other countries, and right now there's some older folks left and people that cannot move. I thought there was a lot of pressure in the Middle East and everybody is suffering, but when you look at the history of Eastern Europe in the recent time, you will see that they didn't have it good either.